She's been the most powerful woman in government for 2 years. But with a new team on its way to Downing Street, what would Rachel Reeves leave behind? She tells us exclusively that as Chancellor, she got the big calls right. In what might be her last interview in number 11, she tells me no regrets, but mistakes, perhaps a few.
Have I done everything right? No. Can anyone say that about any job they've done? Probably not. But the big decisions I've made that have enabled our economy to grow, interest rates to fall, and inflation to be tamed.
Also today, there has been another arrest in the suspected murder of the formidable political veteran and familiar face to us all, Anne Whitikham. Tributes have poured in to one of British politics' enduring figures, former minister for the Conservatives during the 1990s and lately prominent member of Reform. Joining us live this morning, Sir Mel Stride. He was Anne Whitikome's MP in Devon and can bring us up to speed. And what does he, as the Conservative Shadow Chancellor, make of the legacy of his opposite number, Rachel Reeves? And did you stay up for this? Team at the desk this week, the Catholic Archbishop of Westminster, Richard Moth, Labour MP Miata Fambule, who's been busy drawing up plans for Andy Burnham, and a suitably dressed Reform UK and former Conservative Chancellor, Nazim Zahawi. Morning. Let's start, as we always do, with what is making the news. While the first editions of the papers were too late to capture this. England's fans celebrating into the early hours after the 2-1 victory over Norway. It was Jude Bellingham's goals that did it for England, but the next challenge is playing Argentina in the World Cup semi-final on Wednesday. So the headlines are now dominated by that nail-biting win that didn't happen until extra time. Saved by the bell, says the Mirror. Jude Bellingham splashed on the front. Look at this, Jude Bellingham also on the front of the Sunday Times and the Sunday Telegraph. But both of those papers also reporting on the suspected murder of the Conservative MP Anne Whitikham, former MP, and the police's fresh arrest of a suspect in that case. The Mail on Sunday, though, this morning is reporting that Reform MPs are receiving 24-hour security in the wake of Anne Whitikome's death. And as we've just heard, there has been another arrest in this case. This time, a 28-year-old man has been arrested in South Yorkshire, 270 miles from Whitikome's home in Devon. He's being held in custody on suspicion of murder. The police said late last night there was still no information to suggest that her death was related to terrorism, but as a live investigation, they were not going to release any more information for now. Welcome to you here at the desk with me for the next hour. Archbishop, there was a mass held for Anne Whitikham at your cathedral in Westminster on Friday. She was a high-profile convert to Catholicism, and unusually maybe in politics, someone who wore her faith very proudly.
Yes, indeed. I think Anne Whitikham was someone you kind of saw what you got, and she was always very upfront, very clear. People may not always have liked her message, but she had great conviction in what she said. And at this time, obviously, our thoughts are with her friends, her family, all those who will be missing her right across the political spectrum and beyond. And you mentioned the Mass at Westminster. I mean, that's always our first response to the death of anybody is prayer. And so I was very pleased that the cathedral staff yesterday were able to celebrate Mass for the repose of her soul.
And Nadim, you were a Conservative colleague of theirs, but also then, like her, somebody who went from the Conservatives to Reform. And what will you remember of her?
She was always warm, courteous, kind. I always judge people by how they behave towards the sort of the new boys and girls in Parliament. Some will ignore you, others will see you as a threat. Anne didn't have any of that. She's quite the opposite. Incredibly kind. Always had a kind thing to say, whether because she thinks you've done something well, or, as we all do, go through peaks and troughs. as you know, in politics. And so it's heartbreaking what has happened. And I guess it puts in perspective, what is happening in our sort of political discourse. And I think it's incumbent on all of us to just reflect. But it really is very, very sad for us in reform.
Let's then come to some of that political discourse. We're going to hear at length from Rachel Reeves about her time as Chancellor. Briefly, Nadine, you were Chancellor. What's it like to walk out of number 11 with unfinished business?
So I knew I was walking out of number 11 because, if you remember, I became Chancellor and within about 48 hours, my boss had to resign.
And you told her to go, didn't you?
And I had to, in the end, because if you remember, I gave him that line about the herd is stampeding, because it became impossible to even put together a sort of working ministerial team because people were resigning in the same way that happened to Keir Starmer, in that sense, in sort of coordinated effort to get rid of the then Prime Minister.
So you knew that the game was
but
up,
I had to, that what I called it was my summer internship. We had to get a lot done. I'm very proud of signing the first, I think it was 700 million for the new nuclear, and then ARIA, which was a big thing. So what you try and do is as much as possible
as you can in the time
that you can get through.
And we'll talk in detail about what Rachel Reeves did. But Beata, briefly, how would you sum up what she's leaving behind? You want the new guy, you resigned to get the new guy in. Briefly, how would you sum up her time?
Look, I think she had a really difficult set of cards dealt at her, an economy that had been stagnating for 15 years, the biggest squeeze in living standards we've seen in a generation, and our public services decimated because we had a decade and a half of no investment. Really hard to navigate, and I think for her legacy was she made the choice that we have to start investing. Record investment into the NHS, so 5,000 new NHS appointments, NHS waiting lists going down. That would not have happened if she hadn't made that call in that first budget.
OK, well, we will see what she has to say for herself, because they do always say it's the economy stupid when it comes to politics. And when Labour campaigned to get back into power, Labour promised you that sorting out the economy was at the top of their list. And Rachel Reeves then, as Chancellor, was joined at the hip with Keir Starmer, both in opposition and then in office. But as he is on his way out, and she is widely expected also to leave Downing Street, we asked 3 different economists what they made of her time there.
So in terms of living standards, the first 2 years of this Parliament were overall actually a better record than any of the parliaments since 2010, but families have had such a tough time, particularly since the pandemic. What they were hoping for was that the government would do more to turn living standards around than they've been able to do. We've still seen these big rises in the cost of essentials. Energy is still a lot more expensive than it was in 2022, and inflation is still above target.
She inherited a very difficult economic situation, but then she actually made it worse by talking the economy down, dampening business and consumer confidence. She talked a good story in terms of boosting public investment, but her policies actually dampened private sector investment.
Well, of course, you can't do an enormous amount in 2 years. The economy is growing pretty much as it's grown rather slowly for the last 15 years. What this government has done, of course, is massively increase taxes and spending, following pretty much in the steps of the previous government, but none of that was in their manifesto.
Well, mixed reviews. Reeves always said that being Chancellor was her dream job. Being in number 11 doesn't just mean taking on that enormous role. It means living there too, in the fierce glare of publicity. Although, as she showed me, her back garden, life in Downing Street isn't all that bad. One of the funny things about British politics is you live above the shop. I mean, what's it been like living here in the last couple of years?
Well, this is our garden.
It's a very nice garden.
My son likes playing cricket out here, and both of my kids have had birthday parties in this garden, so there's definitely some upsides for them for living upstairs from my office.
What's the downside of living here been? Is it hard to get away?
Oh, it definitely is that, and well, we got a cat when I became Chancellor. Part of the reason for that is that there are quite a lot of mice in Downing Street. So I've always held out against getting a pet, but I definitely prefer a cat to mice. So maybe that's one of the drawbacks, although...
There weren't any rats here, were there?
No. Not that I've seen.
Chancellor, I remember almost exactly 2 years ago, we sat in exactly the same room, and you were fresh from that huge victory that you'd worked so hard for. And I think everybody watching could tell how much it meant to you to be here. But why do you think that just 2 years on, that government you've been part of has come to an end?
In the first 2 years, we have delivered change. We've delivered quite radical change in a number of areas. The number of kids we've lifted out of poverty, the infrastructure investment in energy and transport that's now going ahead and properly funded. And we've been able to do that because, as I kept saying during the general election campaign, and since I've become Chancellor, you have to build growth and change on that rock of stability and trust that I've managed to return to our economy. But people are impatient for change. I'm impatient for change, and I totally get that people want to see their lives changed faster, and that will be the job for Andy Burnham when he becomes a Prime Minister of our country in just over a week's time. But he's becoming Prime Minister because of the majority that we secured, and I also know, because of the work that I have done, Andy will take over an economy that is much stronger than the one that I inherited from the Conservatives just 2 years ago.
Inflation is expected to go up again. The Bank of England's warned that interest rates might have to go up again too. And that most fundamental measure of the economy in people's real lives, unemployment, that's been going up in the last year or so too. And some of the things you're leaving behind are going in the wrong direction.
I do not accept the premise of that at all. If you look at the economy compared to the one I inherited, we are in a much stronger position. So since I've become Chancellor of the Exchequer, wages have risen faster than prices in every single month for 24 months now. If you look at inflation, it reached double digits under the Conservatives. Inflation today is lower in the UK than it is in the Eurozone or in the US. But the most important measure, I think, is how quickly the economy is growing. And I think if someone has said to me or to you 2 years ago, do you think within 2 years you can be the fastest growing economy in the G7? And I think a lot of people would have said, well, good luck with that. But actually, that is what the most recent data show. And there are more people in work than when I became Chancellor.
Some of the most recent numbers on disposable income, what people have to spend, actually shows that disposable income has been going down.
First of all, for 24 months now, wages have risen faster than prices. Now, that is on average, and so it's not the same for everybody. But I am proud of my record there, because in the last Parliament, people were worse off on average at the end of the Parliament than they were at the beginning. But look, this isn't just about lines on a graph. This is about how people feel.
Yeah.
And I remember in our first interview, once I became Chancellor in this room 2 years ago, and you said to me, you know, are you going to lift children out of poverty? And I said, I'm not going to make a promise without being able to say where the money is going to come from. And this is this point, really, about how you've got to combine change and radical change with credibility and with trust. And I wasn't, when I became Chancellor, able to say how we would fund that. But at my second budget, less than a year and a half into this Labour government, I was able to announce the lifting of the two-child benefit rule within universal credit. And that was partly funded by changing gambling taxes. Because, look, for 14 years, I was an MP and I was in opposition. We were not short of promises on radical change. What we were short of was trust and credibility. Now, I have returned that trust and credibility to the economy and to Labour's economic policy. And because of that trust and that credibility, we are now able to do those radical things.
But some of the big calls you've made damaged the government's authority and damaged the trust that some people had in you. And, for example, if you reflect back now, was it a good idea to remove winter fuel allowance from millions of pensioners without any warning?
Well, I've had to make hundreds and hundreds of choices as Chancellor over the last couple of years, and they haven't always been easy choices. I've always tried to do the right thing. But if you are a pensioner watching this programme today, then you have had 2 increases in your state pension, significantly higher than the increase in prices in the economy.
But was it a mistake on winter fuel allowance? Because you know lots of your colleagues haven't. Your next door neighbour, Keir Starmer, has hinted that actually that was one of the mistakes. Was it a mistake?
I'm not going to go through all the different policies that we've announced, but I do know that pensioners are better off after 2 years of this Labour government.
You just don't want to reflect on...
We could go through.
But it's a totemic one, the winter fuel allowance.
The question that people ask themselves at election time is, are me and my family better off? And I can say that because of the choices that I've made, families in Britain, but also pensioners in Britain, are better off than when I became Chancellor.
But one of the other big calls that you made that really surprised people, really upset a lot of people in British business who you'd worked very hard to get on side, was making it more expensive for them to hire people with the increase in national insurance for employers. Reflecting back, is that still the choice that you'd make today? Because we know that the number of vacancies in the economy has gone down. Multiple businesses say that they've had to either get rid of staff or not take on new staff because of that change, and that's
Laura,
affected growth.
There are more people in work today than when I became Chancellor. And we had the fastest rate of growth in the G7.
And there are fewer job vacancies and unemployment's been going up.
Well, the most recent data showed unemployment rate
but
actually come down.
Unemployment is higher
Laura,
than it was when you moved
There are more people in work today than when I became Chancellor. And the economy grew faster than the United States, than Canada, than France, than Japan, Italy and Germany, according to the most recent data. So there are more people working, and the wages that people are taking home are higher than when I became Chancellor. And what do you think happened to that money? The money that we raised by increasing national insurance, it went into our National Health Service. And look, my job is making choices. And I had to decide whether I was willing to put up with NHS waiting lists fast approaching 8 million, or whether I wanted to bring them down. And I made a choice that I wanted to bring those down, but I had to find the money to be able to pay for it.
And you've argued clearly why you made those decisions, but I just wondered, do you regret any of those decisions? Because look, it is the case, and there's huge amounts of evidence from businesses in this country that they feel those choices made it harder for them to take on staff, harder for them to grow, harder then for them to pay the taxes that would go to the things like the NHS that you so passionately believe in.
I am absolutely certain if we could go back 2 years, there are choices that I made that would be different. But look at the big picture, look at the plan, look at the strategy that I have been pursuing. And that strategy was to return stability to the economy, to enable interest rates to come down. We are growing for the first time and seeing productivity growth in our economy at rates we haven't seen for a long while.
The other thing that's been growing, though, is the country's debt. Now, you believe, and you've argued passionately, that you made the right big calls. But are you, as a departing Chancellor, potentially, worried about the level of this country's debt? Is that a concern to you?
Well, of course. I mean, debt is approaching the same size as our entire economy. That is what I inherited as a Chancellor. But when I became Chancellor, I changed the fiscal rules that govern how much you can borrow and spend. And what we did with those fiscal rules, and this was a big change and probably the most fundamental that I've made as Chancellor, it freed up £120 billion to invest in nuclear energy, in road and rail projects, particularly in the north of England, in digital infrastructure, so that we can seize those opportunities. As a result, we are investing in infrastructure in a way we haven't done as a country for a long time, and that is crucial.
But if you look at the overall debt, the debts of this country, since you walked into this building, has gone up. Now, I know before you say it, that it is forecast to come down by the end of this Parliament.
And before that...
But the truth is, and I think it's really important for people to hear this, the debt is forecast to be higher in 2029 than it was in 2024. And if you look at the long term, just in the last couple of weeks, the official number crunchers, I know you have huge respect for them, they've put out a big warning saying the debts of this country is on a path that's unsustainable.
Yes.
And it's gone up on your watch.
There is a difference, Laura, between borrowing to invest and borrowing to fund day-to-day services. A little bit like the difference between borrowing to pay for the weekly shop and borrowing to buy a house. And it is perfectly reasonable to borrow to fund infrastructure investment that will have a payoff over years and decades to come.
No regrets?
No, I think the most important thing that I've done as Chancellor is to change the fiscal rules, which has enabled us to invest once again. We are building new hospitals, we are rebuilding schools whose roofs were literally crumbling in because of concrete problems. So no, it is the right thing to do to increase that investment.
I remember watching the images of you walking into the Treasury for the first time, and you made a speech to the staff who were all assembled there to greet you. And I remember you telling us it was quite emotional to stand there as the first female Chancellor. Would you like to stay as Chancellor?
Well, those are decisions for Andy Burnham when he becomes Prime Minister. I'm not going to preempt, and I'm not going to do that. But I'm incredibly proud of what I've done as Chancellor. And I know absolutely that when Andy walks through that door of number 10, and I'm excited about what that means for our country, and I signed Andy's nomination papers this week, I know that when he walks through that door, that he is not going to have the same problems that we inherited 2 years ago, because we have returned stability and trust to economic policy in the UK. And we have started that radical change of lifting kids out of poverty, investing in projects all around the UK, and in something that I know that Andy cares passionately about, and that's fiscal devolution.
Are you not a bit worried, though, that someone's going to be Prime Minister who once kind of said, oh, well, the bond markets to which the country owes billions and billions of pounds are a bit of a pain and we shouldn't be in hock to them?
Well,
You're not worried about that?
Andy was Chief Secretary to the Treasury when my good friend Alistair Darling was Chancellor and my good friend Gordon Brown was Prime Minister. And Andy absolutely knows, as I do.
Did you tell him that at the time? Did you tell him off?
I don't tell people off, but Andy knows, as do I, that the most successful Labour governments are those that combine change and radical change with credible economic policies. And that is what I know Andy believes in, and I know that is what Andy will do as Prime Minister.
Do you back the idea of number 10 North? I mean, what about number 11 North? I know, you're a Leeds MP that's been sitting here in Westminster. Is it a good idea?
I am absolutely up for devolving more powers and having more decision makers in the north of England. We already at the Treasury have a campus in Darlington, and that is hugely successful. We've got our second permanent secretary, senior team based in Darlington, the sort of number 11 of the north, if you will. And I think having more decision makers, both officials and ministers, based in the north of England and in different parts of the country would be a good thing for policy making. Because the truth is, I want to expand on this because it's something I care hugely about. The truth is there are different needs, but also different opportunities in different parts of the country. And if you hold power in too narrow a part of the country and too small a number of people with a sort of similar mindset and making decisions, they're not going to be the right decisions for places like my constituency in Leeds or Andy's in Wigan.
You haven't just been the Chancellor, you're a highly experienced politician. You've been on the front line, as it were, for a long time, and you were absolutely central to Keir Starmer's whole project. What do you think, reflecting back, is the biggest reason why it's come to an end like this?
I think governing is hard today. I was just with finance ministers from other European countries earlier this week, and governing is hard across a number of developed economies today. There have been a lot of shocks in recent years, whether that's COVID, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, now the conflict in the Middle East, increasing barriers to trade around the world. And at the same time those things are going on, you've also got this huge impatience for change, and I absolutely get that. And I think sometimes that change isn't happening at the pace people want it. And we've got to drive that change forward more rapidly so that people feel it in their everyday lives. But we have to be careful to do it in a way that doesn't undermine that credibility and trust that we've rebuilt in the economy. Because unless you have that, change of any sort, it isn't possible. And that is what you have to marry up, really, as Prime Minister and Chancellor.
I know how hard you and Keir Starmer worked alongside each other for years, and the experience of it slipping away for this version of Downing Street must have been very difficult. When did you realise that it was over?
Well, I just don't see it in those terms, Laura, because I've been an MP now for just over 16 years. 14 of them were in opposition and 2 and a bit have been in government. So Keir won't be Prime Minister in just over a week's time. And Keir is a good friend. He's more than a colleague to me. He's been a good friend. And it's because Keir changed the Labour Party that we've been able to start to change our country for the better. And it's because of Keir that I am the Chancellor and the first ever female Chancellor of the Exchequer. But Labour government isn't slipping away. We're moving to the next phase of this Labour government with Andy as Prime Minister. And it's quite clear that at the next election, the biggest challenge for Labour is going to come from reform. And I think Andy is the right person to take our country and our party, but most importantly our country, on the next stage of this journey.
But it has been a huge deal. You can't dismiss the fact that the Labour Party has decided to get rid of its leader. And we know now that some of your colleagues, Louise Haig has said this on the record, that some of your colleagues were planning with Andy Burnham to move into number 10 for a year. Is that disappointing to you to hear that? That all that time when you were working so hard, there were colleagues who were trying to get you and Keir Starmer out of these jobs that you worked so hard for?
Well, look, I think it is perfectly reasonable for people to have ambition. And Andy has never shied away from the fact that he wanted at some point to leave the Labour Party. And I want him to be ready for that because I want him to be a success, and I am sure he will be. But it is important that when Andy walks through that door, that he has a worked through plan. Because governing is hard in Britain, and lots of challenges and shocks will come his way. And what is really important is that him and his team are really clear about what they want to achieve. But as those shocks come along, he needs to stay laser focused on those things that have always motivated him, have always driven him, and are the reason why he wants to lead our great country.
Is that perhaps what Keir Starmer didn't quite get wrong? That focus on exactly what he wanted to do?
I think that very few of us in government had been in government before. And I feel, 2 years in as Chancellor, I have a clearer idea now of how to get things done in government. This job has been the absolute privilege of my life. But it is important, through all the shocks that come your way, that you are focused.
I think today you've been very candid about the fact that just doing these big jobs is really hard. Governing is hard.
But I'm not complaining about that.
No,
I never wanted to do this job because I thought it was going to be easy. But this is a job I love, and every day when I walk into the Treasury, I feel immensely proud to be a Labour Chancellor.
And I think people would want to know what the hardest bit's been and what the best bit has been. So what's the hardest? Is there a moment where you really felt the big strain? What's the hardest thing been?
Well, I would say, don't cry on national television. That was probably my toughest moment, or perhaps even tougher, seeing the photos of me crying on national television on the front page of pretty much every newspaper the following day. But even that day was better than the 14 years in opposition when I was powerless to change anything in this country.
I don't want to pry about it unnecessarily, but you raised it. Would you tell people what was going on? Because there was a rumour you'd had a fight with the Speaker and something else had happened. But
it was a tough day, and we all have tough days. You know, I talked to my friends, and people wrote to me saying, you know, that happened to me once. And the only difference is that I was on the telly. And so, you know, people have difficult days at work, and that was one for me. But yeah, that's where you should cry, not on the television. So that was my toughest day. But standing up there and delivering a Labour budget, standing outside number 11 Downing Street and doing that. But actually, you know, you think about the people I'm in this for. I went to a school, and I spoke about this actually in my Labour Party conference speech last year, and it really brings home to me why I'm in this job. And it was a breakfast club. It was 8:30 in the morning, and I was sitting on the carpet with this little boy, and he was playing with his Lego. And he was really proud of what he was building, and he was telling me all about it. And he was incredibly engrossed, and he was a really engaging and captivating little boy. And at the end, I spoke to one of the teachers about him, and the teacher said to me, "Do you know what, Rachel? When we started this breakfast club, this boy didn't talk. He didn't talk at all." The breakfast club provides more than the teacher's time or the breakfast cereal. It provided an opportunity for that little boy and thousands like him to get to school a little bit early, to have that time, maybe a bit more personal time with a teacher or a teaching assistant, to start the day ready to learn, to have maybe his horizons expanded a little bit, and maybe a better future. And so for all the tears and all the difficult days and the mistakes perhaps that I've made, it's absolutely worth it to know that that boy has got chances and opportunities today that he wouldn't have had without me as Chancellor, without a Labour Chancellor.
And one final question. You've written books about prominent female figures in politics. I think one of them's even on the table, casually laid there. If you were writing about yourself, what would you say?
Well, I don't plan to do that. But Look, I will go down in history as the first female Chancellor, but what I really hope is that something I said actually when I gave my first speech as Chancellor, that I would know my time in office was a success if young women and girls felt that there should be no ceiling on their ambition. And I do know and I do believe that there are young women today who say, maybe I could do that job one day. That's a great thing. Have I done everything right? No. Can anyone say that about any job they've done? Probably not. But the big decisions I've made that have enabled our economy to grow, interest rates to fall, and inflation to be tamed, and those everyday choices about libraries, about breakfast clubs, about free school meals, around lifting kids out of poverty, about reducing NHS waiting lists, spending more on defence, investing in the infrastructure that our country needs, those things have changed because of the decisions I've made, and I'm proud of that.
Rachel Reeves, Chancellor, thank you very much for speaking to us.
Thank you.
Well, a pretty unrepentant Rachel Reeves there. Mianta, if her and Keir Starmer's record on the economy, which is so important, was that good, why have you as a party hoiked them out?
Look, I think that point that Rachel made, which is that people are impatient for change, and you've got to put it in the context. It's unprecedented to have had a decade and a half in which people's living standards have been squeezed, pay packets have flatlined, and the cost of essentials are rising. People are at breaking point. And so for me, my criticism was, yes, change, but the pace and scale of it needs to be much greater to meet the demand of the country. That's certainly what I heard from my constituents. And that's the thing I think we have to address going forward.
And you were one of the ministers who resigned in order to kind of shuffle them out. And we'll come back in more detail to what your plans you hope for Andy Burnham will be. But is there a chance that Rachel Reeves might get to stay on as Chancellor?
That's a decision for Andy. He'll put together his top team. But look, whoever is in the top role, there is one job we have to do. We've got 2.5 years. The country elected us on a mandate for change. They are very clear that they need things to shift in both their pockets, but fundamentally in their communities that have been denuded. And we all have to crack on, no matter what we're doing, in order to deliver that.
Richard, what went through your mind listening to that? She was somebody at the top of politics in a really tough world for quite a long time.
Yeah, I think one of the things that was striking me was that the people that I meet in the parishes that I visit, there is still poverty. There may be a rise in the standard of living across the nation in some respects, but so many people are still really, really struggling. Mm-hmm. And I think the mention of breakfast clubs, for instance, at the end of that interview, is quite significant, the number of families who need that for their children. So we're not in the right place. 2 years or so in government is really quite a short time. I suppose for me, as a church leader, one of the things that perhaps the church is able to do is to look at a slightly bigger picture. And I think we need a nation that will recognise that those involved in the political sphere are really there at the service of the people.
And do you think that's been missing in the last few years?
Good. Not necessarily completely missing, but I was at the church leaders' breakfast last week, and the speakers of both houses were both speaking at that event about the place of service and of trust as being central in the political sphere. One would hope that sense would just continue to grow in the time ahead.
Nadeem, you were a government minister in various departments for the Conservatives, but you've always been involved in business, and you're chair of one of the big online retailers, Very, at the moment. Rachel Reeves clearly trying to put a really positive gloss on her achievements as Chancellor. How would you rate her?
Look, to governors to choose, and I think the reason we're sitting here today and Keir Starmer is exiting and she's interviewing for her job is because they've made some very, very bad choices. The worst, in my view, is the employer national insurance, because actually you see a direct link to those vacancies dropping, especially for young people. So taking the opportunity away from young people, I think is... And I wish she had... I was waiting for her to apologise, but there was no sort of apology forthcoming, because I think it does come across as tin-eared to just say everything is fine. There's stagnation, low or no growth, right? Good to invest in infrastructure. I agree with that. But the problem is you have levers to pull that you could have pulled. Cheap energy, right? Why are we not investing in our energy resources in our country, gas and oil, because it's much needed because of the headwinds from Ukraine, from the Middle East.
Labour would say that they have laid the stage for new nuclear, and there have been investments in green energy.
And we did some of that before. But my point being is, the OBR now says that actually the economic model is unsustainable. Debt will be 300% of GDP by 2075.
And it is a real kind of hockey stick. So let's
and
talk
it's a
about
real
them.
problem,
Let's talk
and
about
if you
then what
don't
comes
deal
next.
with it, you're going to be in trouble. And my only advice to Andy is you've still got 200,000 men who've come across from war zones of fighting age, which we have no documents, right? We're getting, with this weather, 500, maybe 800 a day coming across. You've got to deal with that.
So look,
that's a massive issue because it impacts public services.
So
it impacts everything else that we do.
And we absolutely will do. But I do think, with all due respect, that if you think about the 15 years that you were part of that Tory government and the absolute catastrophe for the economy, so by all means, provide advice to us.
Mistakes made.
But please acknowledge the inheritance and the mess. So
when I moved to reform, in my speech, I talked about that the problem we had is that the Conservative Party has become a defunct brand because of the mistakes we've made. And unless you face your mistakes, Rachel said nothing about the errors she's made.
Let's then talk about what might come next. So for context, people might not know, but Miata, you've been one of the people busying yourself with preparing plans for potential policies for Andy Burnham. Now, we would love to know if you can give us any of those specific ideas. Is he going to put up capital gains? Is he going to have a property tax? But is taxation overall going to go up? Because he said, I'm going to stick to the manifesto, but there's room for manoeuvre on tax.
Well, listen, if I can take a step back, because I think it's really important that we locate any particular policy within what Andy is trying to do. And, one of the criticisms of us as the Labour government is that we weren't clear about the vision, we weren't clear about the change that we wanted to take the country through. And I think he has done that in spades.
So what is it then for people watching at home? How will their lives be different with Andy Burnham as Prime Minister?
Absolutely. So you take the economy, everyone recognises that people under pressure, living standards have not risen, and we have to grip that. And that means dealing with the cost of living in the short term to give people some respite, but also fundamental reform to the essentials that people need to live well. Housing, energy, water, transport, all far too expensive, and we've got to reform them to make them more affordable through public control. And then on the other side, we've got to boost the economy. And I think there are three parts to that. Firstly, that does mean investment, which I think we have done in our first 2 years, but also giving local places power, resources, the tools to drive growth in every single part of the country in order to create and sustain jobs that pay a decent wage. It means backing British business, particularly small and medium-sized enterprises that have taken the brunt.
So will you help? Let me ask one quick question.
Let me finish.
Tiny question. Right. Small business, family businesses, family farms, will you get rid of the inheritance tax?
Well, listen, on small businesses, I think we need to do far more because they are the bedrock of the economy in every single community.
Will you get rid of the inheritance tax?
They're the bedrock of our high streets, and I don't think we've done enough, and we need to do more.
So what does that mean? Because you are explaining the ethos, you've talked about more public control. Now, does that mean full nationalisation of utilities or something less radical than that?
Look, when we're talking about devolved and more power at regional, local, I don't think we're going to be taking things up to the national. But public control can look slightly different. So whether that is what we're doing on railways, where we are taking our railways back into public ownership, or what, Andy did in Manchester, where actually you take the franchise and you say, these are the routes, this is how much it's going to cost, so that we can ensure that people can get to work in ways that are affordable. It has to be all of that. And critically, the third part for me in terms of economic, we've got to create jobs, but we've also got to make sure that we are empowering workers, giving them rights and the ability to negotiate fairer deals. All of that is critical so that at the end of this, we're increasing wages, we've got jobs that means that you can raise a family, but we're also dealing with the everyday costs that are bearing down on people.
And when you say help for people, help for businesses, what are you actually talking about? So there have been all sorts of things knocking around as possible suggestions, maybe making changes to the tax thresholds when people start paying tax. Do you expect that people at the bottom will have more money put in their pocket by Andy Burnham and government?
Yes.
In what way?
Well, look, I'm not going to get into the specifics because ultimately that will be a choice for Andy and his Chancellor. But we are very, very clear. We understand that people are under pressure and we do need to find ways to give people respite, and that is about money in their pockets, but it's also about driving down the cost of essentials.
But that, by implication, either means cuts, more borrowing, or more taxes for people at the top and businesses who power the economy.
So listen...
Yes?
No, because in the end, it's about the choices. It's about the choices that you make. And what I'd say is we absolutely... So the way you bear down on the debt burden, the way that you unlock money in order to invest is to boost our economy, which is why I am absolutely clear that Andy will be supporting businesses, particularly the 99% of small businesses that are the bedrock of the economy.
One of the small things we do know is that he's likely to put a tax cut on hospitality businesses and some other small independent businesses on the high street. And Richard, just listening to this, what would your grading be?
Well, I think all this is taking place against a context of what is kind of another industrial revolution. And I think that we mustn't lose sight of, Pope Leo's been speaking about the impact of artificial intelligence
and you saw the
recently.
Pope last week,
I was with the Pope last week. We didn't get a chance to talk about AI last week, but he's issued this wonderful letter addressing the place that the world is in. And I think we mustn't lose sight of that backdrop of the good things that AI might bring, but also the need to keep the value of the human person at the core of all of this. I go back to that point about service, that if we need to keep the value of the human person in every one of these conversations, otherwise the policies are not going to achieve what they need to achieve.
And of course this is all taking place at such a time of political turbulence, everywhere, but also in this country. Nadeem, your new adopted party, Reform, has been leading in the polls for a long time now, but there have been a real slew of claims and allegations about how your party and your party's leadership has been either looking after its finances or, frankly, not looking after its finances and not declaring things in a proper way. There are more claims this morning in the Sunday Times about a close ally of Nigel Farage supporting the party financially without declaring things properly. Would you forgive our viewers for looking at all of this and thinking there's actually something really wrong here? There's a pattern.
Well, I think what Nigel's done is the right thing, because in my...
What, to call a by-election?
Well, I tell you for why, because it's up to the people of Clacton to back him or sack him. I think that my experience is the sort of the Westminster circle, whether through a coordinated attack on Reform or otherwise, is a pylon to stop Nigel, to stop Reform from becoming...
But Nadeem, you've been a politician for a long time. You and I have conducted interviews over the years on many times.
Yes.
You know this is exactly the kind of scrutiny that's applied to anyone who wants to become Prime Minister, whether a gift over millions of pounds or whether it was the field that Keir Starmer had for his mother's donkey.
Right.
This is exactly...
Let me answer that directly, because you and I go back a long way. Right. Is it right that Nigel be judged by a kangaroo court of MPs who are all anti-Nigel?
What do you mean, parliamentary authorities?
Right. It is.
Like
there's no one on that committee.
Every single member of Parliament.
There is no one on that committee
opens themselves up to the same scrutiny. If you do things wrong, you need to be held to account, and he clearly has done a set of things that are wrong.
The best scrutiny is the people of Clacton, because ultimately they will judge Nigel and they will judge the Reform Party. But the fear that he has put into the sort of mainstream uni-parties, I think, at the moment, is there is a coordinated attack on Nigel, on Reform, and actually the best thing he's done, because I saw this happen in the past where, you have an investigation,
you get told you can't say anything and not declare it.
No,
do you
hold on a
think
second.
It is okay and legitimate to take 5 million and not declare it?
Yes, because it's within the rules and it's been...
Okay. That is what
lawyers
will be
have looked at it. No,
that's what
absolutely,
he will be judged on.
It was a private gift, unconditional, before he even considered becoming an MP. So it's worth answering that question.
OK, well, that argument is going to run. As you say, people in Clacton will have a chance to vote on what they think about what's been going on.
And the uni-parties, if they thought they could win the seat, they would have put candidates up.
Well, the parliamentary authorities will look into it in due course.
And Justine Greening, one of my old colleagues from the Conservative Party, berated her own party by saying democracy should be protected and the main party should put up candidates and not shy away.
We will see what
Clacton.
happens. It's not going to be a quiet summer, that's certainly sure. Well, remember, as ever, of course, we want to know what is on your mind about any of the stories that we have been discussing here this morning. You can email us, kuenssberg@bbc.co.uk, or you can send us a WhatsApp, 08000 282 161, or if you're into other kinds of social media, our hashtag is BBC Laura K. Well, the man who shadowed Rachel Reeves' every move is Sir Mel Stride, who's with us this morning for the Conservatives as Shadow Chancellor. But I also want to start by asking you about the terrible events surrounding the death of Anne Whitikham, because you're the MP for Central Devon, where she was found at home. Can you bring us up to date with what you know? We know there's been a second arrest after a man was arrested, then released yesterday.
Yes. Well, can I firstly say this is a terrible, terrible event that has occurred, and my heartfelt thoughts go out to her family, to those who knew Anne. She was an extraordinary lady in many ways, and she'll be very much missed. In terms of what I can add to things, I can't add really anything over and above that which is already in the public domain. I have spoken with the Chief Constable of Devon and Cornwall to be updated. But it wouldn't be appropriate for me to start speculating on any further developments at this point. OK.
Your leader, though, Kemi Badenoch, said that the Conservative Party was reeling after her death. Do you have a particular memory that will stay with you?
Yeah, when I was first elected, actually, Anne, who was then a member of the Conservative Party, would go around with me, and we'd go to garden fêtes and church fêtes and meet people. And I was always struck both by the fact that she had real conviction as an individual. You could agree with her or disagree with her, but she had true conviction, strong personality. Yet she had that twinkle in her eye, that enormous energy, and that great sense of humour, and a rather arresting laugh as well that I think she had. And I think that combination is quite rare, actually, and rather special. Yeah.
So let's then talk about Rachel Reeves. Now, we know that you don't agree with Rachel Reeves on everything, maybe anything, but I wonder, do you think that she's been a responsible Chancellor overall?
No, I don't, because Rachel Reeves came into government without a plan, as indeed did Keir Starmer, and that's been central to their undoing. She was somebody who spoke about growth, 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 but we've seen very anaemic growth since she's been in. She took the wrong choices, putting up taxes, particularly on businesses, which destroyed growth, talked down the economy when she first came in with that fictitious black hole that the OBR then ironically debunked at
rather
her.
A lot of that black hole, even if it didn't add up to 22 billion.
Just quick, I'm happy to come on to that. Yeah. But the other thing she did, of course, is she borrowed vast amounts of money. So about £250 billion worth of additional borrowing across the Parliament compared to the plans that she inherited. And if you do those things, you destroy growth, you destroy businesses, you have increased unemployment, highest level for 5 years, massive youth unemployment, and you have a low growth, overextended economy that's very fragile. That is what she has left us.
What's interesting, though, is that during moments in the last 2 years when it looked like she might have been at risk and perhaps she was going to resign or Keir Starmer was going to move her, what you saw then in the financial markets were real jitters. And the markets actually looked to her as somebody who at least would provide some kind of stability. I mean, even grudgingly, do you accept in any way that she was a force for stability after an awful lot of chaos under the Conservatives?
No. The big
you don't accept that at all?
The big test of this is what confidence does this economy command in the bond markets? And what we know is that we are paying the highest level of interest on our debt of any country in the G7, higher than Greece, higher than Morocco, and that is a reflection of the wrong decisions that this Chancellor have taken.
But we are that's growing not the same faster thing. Than those other countries.
But on this point about the market reaction to her potentially going, that is driven by the fact that the markets fear that things could get even worse under Andy Burnham or Ed Miliband or somebody else. So it's all relative. But I'm afraid her scorecard is very low when it comes to securing the economic future of our country and commanding the confidence of those markets.
Is there anything you think that she did that you would say, yeah, fair enough?
Not a lot. I've scratched my head on that one. I really find that rather difficult to feel that there was a huge amount, actually. No.
In her interview, she said that the single biggest change that she made was changing the fiscal rules. Now, I don't want to get too technical, but these are really important. The rules that govern how the government spends, how the government borrows. And her mantra was that everyday spending needs to be paid for out of tax. You can borrow to invest in the long term, things like roads and railways, but the debt has to be coming down within a 3-year period. If the Conservatives get back into power, would you keep those rules or would you change them?
We would change them. We are reviewing them at the moment.
So you
just
definitely
to be
would
clear,
change them?
though, but this is a really important point because we're getting into technical territory, but it really matters. What Rachel Reeves did was to not stand by the fiscal rules that she inherited, even though she said that she would in the run-up to the election. And she changed the definition of debt that allowed her to borrow a lot more. And that's where the additional £250 billion worth of borrowing across the Parliament, compared to the plan she inherited, comes from. What we have said is we have to get the debt down. We are the only party that not only recognises the problem of the debt, but has a plan to deal with it. Which
just to stick on that, a lot of people watching might think, you know what, she had to do that to get cash to spend on things that the Conservatives just didn't spend on for years on end.
So the way to get investment up in our country, and let's not lose sight of the fact, it's not government investment that is the bulk of the investment in the economy, it's private investment, is to create an economic ecosystem in which our country is fundamentally investable. And that means lower taxes, lower taxes particularly on businesses, wealth creation, job creation, a growing economy. It means getting the size of public spending under control, getting the welfare
budget
budget
you didn't do.
Under control. I brought in reforms as Secretary of State for Work and Pensions.
But overall,
that the OBR,
you know very well the budgets kept going up
the
and up
OBR
and up.
said that there would be, as a consequence of my reforms, 450,000 fewer people going on to long-term sickness and disability benefits. The first thing that the Labour government did was to scrap that entirely. And they have failed to grip welfare. If we can grip welfare, then we can get taxes down, grow the economy and lean into those challenges like spending more on defence.
So it's interesting.
But we can't do it if you don't have the backbone to take those sometimes tough choices.
So you confirmed this morning you would change the rules on spending and borrowing, which is that's a really important
Well, we have already made
distinction.
specific announcements on that.
Can you tell us simply how you would do that?
OK, so what we have said is something called the golden rule, that is for every pound that we save in government spending, we've announced about £50 billion so far, including £23 billion on the welfare budget. At least half of that should go to paying down the deficit. And if you do that, then in turn, of course, you can get on top of the debt. So we've made a very clear position on that, and we're the only party that has done that. All the other parties run around talking about spending and cutting taxes and things. The numbers often don't add up, and that's an issue for reform in particular, but they're also not talking about what they'd really do to get our debt down.
Just lastly, you've sparred across the dispatch box with Rachel Reeves for a couple of years. Is there anyone else you fancy having jousts with on a weekly basis, or who would you fear the most as your new opposite number?
I will approach whoever it is in the way that I approached Rachel, which is at a personal level to always be civil and friendly and respectful of each other. But when I'm up at the dispatch box, I am here to hold the government to account. I don't think it matters too much who it is in many ways. No, because some of the fundamentals won't change. You've got a Prime Minister who clearly is going to lean more into tax, more into borrowing, all the problems that we've just touched on, and backbenchers who are not capable of taking the tough decisions to get, for example, on top of the welfare bill.
Well, we will see. Mel Stride, Sir Mel Stride, thanks very much indeed for joining us this morning. And we will know who Mel Stride's next opposite number is going to be a week tomorrow. And remember, looming over all of our conversations this weekend is the fact that on Friday there will be a new leader of the Labour Party. And then a week tomorrow there will be another one, another new Prime Minister. So let's get a closing thought or two from our panel this morning in terms of what might come next. Richard, the country has a tradition that politicians in the modern times don't really talk about their faith very much. But we've talked about Anne Whitikham. But it's also interesting, Andy Burnham is going to be the first Catholic Prime Minister. Do you think that will have meaning in terms of how he leads? And does it have meaning to you?
Yes, it does. It certainly has meaning to me, and I'm sure it does to him. As a Catholic, a Christian, one thinks out of that space, if you like, and that informs conscience. It informs the way we think about things. Certainly looking at it from a Catholic perspective, and I touched on this earlier, a really big accent on the value of the human person. And I really do hope that we're going to see that real concern for humanity, not just in the grand scale, but as we were referring to earlier, the needs of families, the needs of the homeless. All that will come from his Catholic understanding, I think.
And what does it mean to you as well as leader of the Catholic Church in this country? Is it a big, an important milestone?
Well, yes, I hope it will be. I was privileged to have a meeting with Keir Starmer just after I became Archbishop of Westminster, and depending on how things unfold in the next week or so, I'll be looking to have a meeting with our new Prime Minister and discuss things with him too.
Beata, as part of Andy Burnham's team, is England winning the World Cup part of your strategy to cheer everyone up?
100%. Look,
it might delay him taking office.
It might do, but it would be
England win the final on the 20th.
It would be absolutely
he won't be able to take
worth it.
office till, I think, the Friday after that.
But look, the amazing thing for me about the World Cup and the way that the entire nation rallies around England, obviously, my husband's Scottish, so that's slightly different.
I was supporting England. I had Norway in the office sweepstake, but I was still supporting England. I'll just put that on the record.
That amazing thing that people just come together, and actually at a time when our politics feels divided, our communities feel divided, we have politicians that are sowing division. That coming together around the collective, I think, is so important. So I think it's that spirit that Andy is so clear he wants to tap into. And I think he will be a politician that tries to bring the country and people together. He talks about people first, place first, none of the point scorers. I think politics, and therefore I hope the conversation in the nation will feel very different.
And Nadeem, you have got tickets to the semi-final.
So,
briefly, how excited are you?
Amazing. David Dean, the ex-chairman of Arsenal, runs a brilliant charity called the Twinning Project, where they twin prisons with football clubs to give people a second chance. Had a charity do about a couple of months ago, and Arsene Wenger was there. He actually said, I will put up 2 tickets. And I bid and had to choose which semi-final to go to. And I worked out that England will win the group. We're heading to Atlanta tomorrow at 4 p.m.
And you've already got your shirt on. You guessed the right one. All 3 of you, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Of course, everybody will wish England well for Wednesday, and that match will be here on BBC One. Thank you to all of our guests today. Thank you most of all to you for spending your Sunday morning with us at home. We are living through eventful times. On Friday, Andy Burnham will become the 20th leader of the Labour Party. Then a week tomorrow, he's expected to walk into Downing Street, becoming the 59th Prime Minister of this country. And of course, I'll look forward to seeing you next Sunday. But before then, that huge match, the semi-final on Wednesday, is coming. Now, when another UK nation, Wales, had hopes of making it into the tournament, you might remember that the singer Bonnie Tyler joined us on the programme to wish them well. And of course, she blasted out a burst of one of her best-known hits. Sadly, she passed away this week at the age of 75. But we thought this morning, who else's voice to turn to after last night's drama, As England Expects.
Gonna bring it back, gonna score. Bellingham's got this.
Bellingham's top, Kane's top, it's coming home, it's coming home.
So proud. Absolutely smashed it, mate.
What better way to finish the night with watching the football, a win for England, raising the vibration of the nation.